Hey everyone, I'm the Casual Prince, and welcome to a very special video. This is going to be my Arthur 4 Defender of the Seven Kingdoms anniversary Q&A episode. Now for those of you who don't know, Arthur 4 Defender of the Seven Kingdoms is my fanfiction on Wattpad and basically what started me on this incredible journey that has led me to where I am today. Now, you're going to be seeing this on September 5th, which is its anniversary, but I'm actually recording this on, just had to make sure, the 28th of August. Reason being, I have said I will be on holiday on September 5th. And I've got to do something in honor of Arthur 4. Now, the fact that it's been a year since I've finished it, is insane. And it will also mean I've been working on Arthur 5 for a year, which is also crazy. And yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into answering your questions about Arthur 4. We have 4 tonight. So, our first question comes from Tasku, who's actually left 2 this time. Honestly, such a legend. So, the first question from Tasku is, what was your first idea when you started writing Arthur 4? Now, you have to understand, like, when I first found out everything, you know, that the Avenger Malzahn, the War of Two Worlds were a thing, that Arthur and the Invisibles was just a cut version of Arthur and the Minimoys, etc, etc, etc. Basically, the Arthur revolution for me, if you will. I've called it that a few times. I guess it's starting to stick now. When that happened, I sort of entered into a obsessive state of inspiration with the franchise. And in regards to the story, my mind was just like, right, Arthur and the Great Adventure, what's all the things that should have been in the franchise and aren't? So the first idea was basically what evolved into the story of Arthur 4, which was what would happen if the Minimoys were discovered in real life. People would want to use them, abuse them, maybe sell them, showcase them, etc, etc. It's just what happens when anyone makes a new geological or like someone discovers a new animal. It's just what happens, isn't it? Or discover a new resource. It's what happens. People try to patent it and abuse it and use it for their own purposes, and that's what Arthur 4 really evolved into, because I feel like that at the time I felt like that was a really interesting thing that I could sort of explore. Like, what if someone really knew about the magic of the Minimoys and they wanted to use it and they knew about it, and obviously Arthur wouldn't let that happen, so how does that affect him? How does that affect the Minimoys? So that the first idea I had basically was the idea that turned into the book. But Arthur 5 was a little different. Obviously, after I finished Arthur 4, I immediately started thinking about what are we going to do for Arthur 5. And actually, I don't even think it was after I finished Arthur 4, because about halfway through writing Arthur 4, I realized I wanted to do another one, because I said these exact words in my final chapter of Arthur 4, which is my word from the author. Arthur 4 was too subtle a story to act as a finale, but Arthur 5 was too epic to act as a reintroduction to a series that's been dead for like 8 years. So obviously I was thinking about what the storyline of Arthur 5 was going to be while I was writing Arthur 4, and a few different ideas came into my head about Arthur 5. I don't suppose there's any harm in divulging some of the ideas I originally had. I think the very first idea I had for Arthur 5 was that Malthazar was going to be the main villain, which is a bit surprising that I had that idea, considering the reason I didn't have the reason I had Malthazar as a sub-villain and not the main villain in Arthur 4 was because I thought he'd been overused in other fanfictions that I'd read. That was another contribution to the story and everything of Arthur 4, because obviously before I started writing it, I checked out other fanfiction to see if there was anything good, and pretty much all of them used Malthazar as the villain, with no good explanation as to how he'd actually escaped the good old glass cup that we see him in the end of Arthur 3. So I just thought that Malthazar was so overused in the fanfictions that were written thus far that it was time for someone else to sort of take the spotlight. Like Malthazar getting used for 4 adventures as the villain, I thought that might be a bit overkill. And he's like messed up a lot. So I thought that the Professor could work together with Malthazar, but going back to the point I was making, one of my original ideas, probably the original idea for Arthur 5, was that Malthazar, who at the end of Arthur 4 vanished, would actually go back to Africa, where the Minimoys are originally from, and try to find this ancient source of power, and Arthur, Selenia, and Benamish would go after him, go to Africa, and try and hunt down this source of power as well, and use it to finally destroy Malthazar. But that was in the really, really early days, and obviously I abandoned that idea in light of the storyline I've come up with for Arthur 5 now, which I'm actually using, which of course is the story of Mulder, this new mysterious force of evil being the villain in Arthur 5, and yeah, I definitely prefer the storyline I'm going with now to the one I was thinking of going with originally, because obviously it gave me the chance to introduce Dylan, and there's going to be other characters that I get to introduce later on, and yeah. But back to the question, my first idea was basically the whole character arc of the Professor was my whole driving force behind the story of Arthur 4. What would happen if real-life people found the Minimoys? They would use them, they would abuse them, and they would use them for their own personal needs and showcase them to the world. So that sole idea was my whole inspiration for the story. So thank you for that question, Tasku. Animation Fan Squad, what a surprise. And it's funny because if you've seen my my 200 sub special Q&A, then you'll know she actually left the question I'm about to read while I was recording that, and you can actually see me check it out live on that video. So you really put it at an opportune time, didn't you, Animation Fan Squad? Honestly, the timing. Anyway, she asks, how did you come up with the character of Cheven? Did you just use your fantasy, or did you base him off of someone, or a little bit of both? Looking back, I do think there was someone I based him off, but I can't for the life of me remember who it was. I might not have done, I might have done, but I seem to remember basing him off of someone loosely. But it was just the whole purpose of his character is to represent the greed of modern humans and what would happen if the Minimoys were actually discovered. But now that I think about it, in relation to comparing him to other characters, I say he's sort of a mix between Archibald, Armand, and Malthazar, because he's got Archibald's knowledge of the Minimoys and sort of his just his intelligence, basically. He's got Armand's persistence and stubbornness, which of course he retains more in, like, before the end of Arthur 3, because obviously the Armand we read about in Arthur 4 is changed, and I wanted to do that because in all the fan fictions that I've read, obviously at the end Armand promises Arthur that he'll try to be worthy of having a son as great as he is, and Arthur is a pretty great guy. And some fan fictions I've read just disregard that completely and are just like, oh yeah, he promised to be a good father, but he's still the same vindictive piece of crap that he was in Arthur 2 and 3. Just like, do you actually watch the movies to write these fan fictions, or are you just doing it to make the franchise look bad? Honestly, other people's fan fictions. But yeah, he's a bit of a mix of Archibald because of his intelligence, Armand because of his stubbornness, and Malthazar just because he's evil. And we actually see parts of Chevenne that are a lot more vicious than Malthazar, because although Malthazar is evil, of course we see that. Excuse me. There's a certain viciousness to Chevenne that's sort of only revealed near the very end, when he faces off against Arthur. And I just think that he's sort of an amalgamation of these three characters, but I just based him off of maybe not a person, but just the idea of what his character is supposed to represent. I made him, like, tactful, I made him strategic, I made him intelligent, and I made him, above all else, underestimate Arthur. Because that is every one of Arthur's villains' greatest weakness, isn't it? They underestimate him. Malthazar completely underestimated Arthur. I think more in Arthur 1 than he did 2 and 3. Although, like in Arthur 3 you could see that Malthazar was trying to beat Arthur, and he almost succeeded. But Chevenne takes every opportunity to mock Arthur, and you can just tell that he underestimates him. He's called him a child multiple times. He even called him a dandelion, which I'm particularly proud of, that little reference to Arthur 1, where the travel agent calls Arthur a dandelion. I even put a little thing that Arthur felt annoyed, and that wasn't the first time he'd been called a dandelion. And I wanted to see how many people would get that. So basically it was a little bit of both. I do know that I based them off of someone. Well, I'm just tired. I'm recording this late at night. I do think I based it off of someone, but it's just his whole character was based off of the idea his own character was based around, which is a weird thought. To put it more clearly, his character is meant to represent the greediness of modern humans, so I based his character around that, just being greedy, underestimating Arthur as he does, until the very end. So yeah, it was probably a little bit of both. I was inspired by a lot of different characters. Like, obviously, in regards to what kind of character he is, he's the greedy person who wants to claim something as his own. And there's a lot of those characters in a lot of different movies, so, you know, you can handpick whoever you want to serve as the inspiration for Chevenne, because it's a stereotype of a character that the explorer, or just someone who found something and they want to keep it for themselves, they want to be selfish, and they're willing to go to any means to keep it to themselves and keep it as their own discovery. And this is really going to sound a bit weird, but thinking about it, obviously, like I said, it's a stereotype. There are a lot of different characters that are similar to who Siobhan is and what his motives are. But if I had to think of an example, it would probably be a character from a movie called The Dinosaur Project. Going back to my liking of dinosaurs again, it's an alright movie. I've only watched it twice. I remember I got it years and years ago. I was in a Morrison's one time, I think, and I just saw it on a DVD rack. I was like, okay, that's a movie, why don't I give it a go? And I watched it again a few months ago, and it was actually alright, and the plot's actually pretty interesting. What the Dinosaur Project is, it's a found footage movie, and I'm sure you all know what those are, but if you don't, it's basically a movie shot from the perspective of someone actually holding like a handheld camera, as in like, and that's why it's called a found footage movie, because someone has found the footage. So yeah. And what the Dinosaur Project, I think I just shook my camera stand. I just whacked my knee against the table. That wasn't smart. What the Dinosaur Project actually is, the plot is that in a jungle in Africa, I'm pretty sure, there's been sightings of dinosaurs and weird creatures, basically. And this team go to investigate, then getting trapped there, of course, because, you know, that always happens. And it turns out that there's this weird portal. It's not sure. This is sort of what I found interesting about the movie. The portal isn't like a gigantic glowing like vortex of like purple energy or something. What it is, it's literally just like a hole in the floor that drops down into this little watery cave, and then you just go out of there, and basically it's a portal to the land of the dinosaurs. And dinosaurs have been coming through, they've been climbing up through the hole and into the normal world, into our present day. And there's a character in there. The three main characters are this really famous explorer, his son, who stows away on the helicopter they take, and the explorer's assistant. I think his name's Harry. I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, I haven't watched it in months. But basically, it does a really good job of laying in little, when we first are introduced to this character, it's in like an interview with him, and he basically says that he's been beside this famous explorer for all the stuff that he's discovered and everything, and yet his partner has always got all the credit, and he's, you know, never really got the publicity that he perhaps deserves. And the movie does, I mean, it's not the best quality movie, like, it definitely could be better, and there are quite a few inaccuracies in it, which someone like me turns their nose down, oh, that is the saying, isn't it, and turns their nose up at stuff like that. But the plot line is a pretty decent movie, and along the movie, it does quite a good job of letting in subtle little hints, reminders that this guy is not happy that he's always been sidelined. And eventually, when they discover what they call the gateway, the portal, the hole in the floor, he fully goes in, because it's his plan all along to sort of try and claim discovery of these dinosaurs, because obviously discovering dinosaurs would be making the greatest explorer, and it'd be the greatest It'd be the greatest discovery, like, in the history of man. Just like, Cheven in Arthur 4. If he discovered the Minimoys and told the world, it would be the greatest discovery in the world, ever. And that's what he wants. And just like in the Dinosaur Project, this character, it's always been his plan to claim ownership of these dinosaurs, and he's willing to go to whatever lengths it takes to, make sure he's the one in the spotlight. So he separates himself and the explorer's son from everyone else in the group. There's not many people left by that point. And he basically pushes, he's just like, the son is fixing the satellite phone to call for help, and he finally fixes it. And there's a bit where the character just looks up at him, like, really creepily and really slowly, and goes, "Good job, kid," and then pushes him into the gateway. And that's just a really, really awesome reveal that he's fully gone insane. You see it a little bit as they're, like, when they've first been separated, and then when it's finally revealed, it's pretty cool. And he ends up killing, well, actually, there's a bit of debate about this. I'm just going completely off topic, but I'm using this as an example. Eventually, the father reunites with the son, but this guy causes a rock slide that ends up, quote-unquote, killing the father, and then goes on the hunt for the son to kill him as well, because he doesn't want anyone else to have ownership of this. And then he gets eaten by dinosaurs, as you probably would expect. And then at the very end, there's like a short little glitchy video. It's like a second that shows the son and the father, so they both survived, I think. It's a pretty good movie. You should, you can probably get it for really cheap. I would recommend watching it, if only to watch it once. If you're slightly into dinosaurs, then I would and found footage films, then I would recommend giving it a go. Back on topic, those two have a lot in common. They've been sidelined, and they're willing to go to any length. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. My own imagination and basing it off other characters. So, another question from Tasku. What was the most challenging thing while writing Arthur 4? For example, new characters, new story, and new locations. To be perfectly and truly honest, the most difficult thing about writing Arthur 4 was staying inspired. And that's the blatant and honest truth. Because I kept thinking to myself, obviously, this was quite a difficult time for me. Because of my final year of high school, and you know how that's very stressful, and you got exams and stuff like that, and obviously the whole thing about me suddenly liking Arthur, and that's not really accepted, and considering I was really not popular at all, like everyone hated me in high school, but to add that on top of it really didn't help me. But you know, I wasn't gonna hide in the dark. Like a lot of people just hide stuff they like just to try and fit in, and I've never agreed with that, because then you're letting them win, aren't you? You're letting them pressure you into being like them, and that's not who you are. But obviously it was the whole thing about me liking Arthur, and that stressed me out, and it was the whole thing about, can I do the franchise justice? Can I carry this on, like, convincingly? Can I do it to the best of my ability? And obviously, for a lot of Arthur 4, I had no comments, and very few people read it, so obviously that was a little discouraging. But luckily, my obsessive inspiration at that time kept me going, and I'm so glad it did, because I'm pretty sure, I'm having a look at the stats of, no, that's Arthur 5 actually. I'm having a look at the stats. The stats on Arthur 4, and it's weird because Arthur 5 gets like so many comments every new chapter. Like, I'm just looking at the engagement section. Comments by part. Part 10, which I believe was the Midnight Reunion. Which was obviously a big chapter because after all that time, after 9 chapters previous, obviously including the prologue, of build-up, Arthur finally reunited with Selenia and Dylan finally reacted to the Minimoys being real, and that got 52 comments. Whereas Arthur 4, to this day, chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 17 have no comments to this day. And it's just pretty crazy to think that, like, obviously it's been out quite a while now. But it's just like, obviously I had very little comments starting out, and now I get comments all the time on Arthur 5, and it's just such a contrast. But I'm very glad that I carried on with it. Obviously, I wouldn't have traded working on Arthur 4 for anything. But yeah, it was staying inspired because I kept doubting myself, and obviously the fact I've told you guys this before. I've always been a avid writer. My writing's not always been good by any stretch of the imagination, but I've always been an avid writer, and I've always had new ideas every now and then, and I've never finished a book before Arthur 4. I've never even gotten close. So to finish a book, that was a really good step for me, because it showed that I can do this. And obviously your guys' support meant the world to me. But in regards to other things, new characters, one of Arthur 4's downfalls was that it only had the one new character, and that was obviously Sivan, the professor. That was why I realised, that was another reason I realised I needed to write Arthur 5, because the finale to the Arthur franchise couldn't just have one new character. New story, obviously it was based around the whole idea of what would happen if humans discovered the Minimoys. And new locations, there weren't actually that, I don't think there were really any new locations, apart from certain parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Which, like, the storm scene, where they're camping out beneath the giant blade of, beneath the leaf, that's not really hard to think of. It's just nature, and I took what we'd been shown in Arthur 1 and Arthur 2 in regards to all the nature of the Seven Kingdoms. So yeah, it was basically staying inspired that was the toughest thing for me. But obviously I managed to pull through, and now we have Arthur 4, and I'm on to Arthur 5 now, and I really wouldn't trade it for anything. So, our final question comes from Zeno Samo, and I'm guarantee I'm saying that wrong, and I apologise. And this, I've left this one to last because this is my personal favourite. What made you think to upgrade the sword during the fight against the Professor? This is a good one. So, for those of you who haven't read Arthur 4, you really should, because I think I did a pretty good job. The final battle takes place outside Arthur's house, and takes place between Arthur and the Professor. Robert Cheven, who uses a forbidden metabolite power known as the power of balance to achieve amazing powers and basically turn into a demon. And Arthur is pretty much defenseless. I'm actually going to get the passage from Arthur 4 up right now. He's basically defenseless. Chapter 16, the power of balance. And basically, he has Arthur cornered. He's made this giant circle of flame around them, and he's cornered him. And he fires this beam of golden light towards Arthur, and he's got nowhere to run. And he, it says there was nowhere to run, nowhere to dodge to. So Arthur did the only thing he could think of. He closed his eyes and raised the sword. And then the smoke finally clears. Selenia is being levitated a few feet off the ground by Cheven at this point, having just watched her prince supposedly die. But then the smoke clears, smoke clears, and Arthur's fine with the sword, and the sword is glowing with, and I quote, the sword of power which still remained upright in Arthur's hand now glowed with the golden light of 1,000 suns. And it obviously saved him. And from that point on, Arthur is able to use the sword to shoot beams of green light at Cheven. And this is also an ability that he can use in chapter 11. I'm pretty sure it's 11. Yeah, it's got to be 11. Chapter 11 of Arthur 5, when he's battling Mulder for the brief few minutes of chapter 11, Darkness Rising. Before, of course, spoilers for Arthur 5, before, of course, Mulder destroys the Sword of Power. And how crazy was that? Leave down in the comments your reaction to the sword getting destroyed, because I couldn't wait to write that. Anyway, back on point. So he uses the sword, and the sword saves him, and it gains the power to shoot beams of green light. Now, what gave me that idea is two things. The first is that I knew Cheven would use the power of balance for quite a while, but I knew that if he did that with the normal sword of power, Arthur wouldn't stand a chance, because it's called the power of balance for a reason, and if it weren't for Arthur, Cheven would probably be unstoppable. And I just knew that he had to have some sort of advantage over Cheven. The second reason is that I think the sword should have been more powerful anyway. This goes to something from the Arthur and the Invisibles game, which is canon because it features information that is canon in the books. The game has runes which you can collect, which give you little fact files about things from the Seven Kingdoms, and one of them is the Sword of Power. And it states that the Sword of Power was forged by the ancient Minimoys, which were the original Minimoys that lived in Africa. And they used the finest steel, and so on and so forth. And considering that back in that day they probably would have a lot more advanced magic than they would now, you would presume that there's a reason the Sword of Power is the only weapon left of its kind, and that's probably because it was the most powerful. And the ancients wrote, it just, in the game it just says the ancients wrote, but in the book it's revealed that they wrote in the stone, but in Arthur 4 and 5, I put the inscription on the sword instead, and I think that works just as well. The legend says, if one day our lands are threatened by an invader, then and only then a pure heart motivated by the spirit of justice may remove the sword of 1,000 powers and lead a just battle, because the ancient Minimoys put the sword in the stone so that their descendants would solve their problems through peaceful means. Which in hindsight was a pretty bad idea, considering how much evil there always has been in the Seven Kingdoms. But anyway, it's described as the sword of 1,000 powers. And although that's just a cool title, you would have thought that if it's the sword of power, and it's also referred to as the magic sword, it would be a bit more powerful. Because out of all of its powers, I can only think... Well, I say all of its powers, I can only think of 3 powers that it actually possesses. A cool burst of explosive light when it's removed from the stone. To be able to slice through, like, pretty much anything. And ease of use when wielded by the right person. And the reason I say wielded by the right person is because we see in Arthur 3, Selenia tries to fight Darkos, and immediately the sword is just catapulted out of her hand. So I've got the distinct feeling that the whole ease of use thing only applies to Arthur. And it's clear that that's a thing, because obviously Arthur is a child, so I won't rule out the fact that he may have play-fighted with sticks and such in his past. But playing with sticks is one thing, compared to fighting Sage, which are warriors that have been trained to kill Minimoys, and holding his own against Darkos, the son of Malthazar the Evil M, / Malthazar the Cursed, who has been trained in combat since birth. Ease of use. Because there's no way that he'd be able to hold his own against Darkos without the help of the sword. But considering it's the sword of 1,000 powers, I would have expected it to be a little more powerful than it is in the movies. So I thought I'd upgrade it and give it some more flashy powers. And obviously the whole story of Arthur 5 is going to be Arthur going on a quest to try and reforge the Sword of Power, and obviously it's only just been destroyed, and I've not revealed how that's going to happen. I obviously do know how it's going to happen, but I haven't revealed how it's going to happen yet. And if / when it does happen, we will see some more powers, some more awesome powers. So stay tuned and keep a watch on Arthur. Keep watching Arthur 5 as I continue to update it. So that's the end of the questions. But as it's Arthur 4's anniversary, I wanted to talk about a few other things. And I also one of the things I wanted to do was go into detail about the Professor, Robert Cheven. Because his character is not explained very well in depth. And the times he's talked about most, his backstory, is in chapter 12, The Truth. Basically, in chapter 12, Cheven manages to trap Arthur, Selenia, and Benamish, as well as all the other Minimoys that he's already trapped. And basically, it's surprising that it took Archibald this long, but Archibald finally recognizes him as Robert Cheven. He's been going by Yancey Davis this entire time, and that was just an alias. For those of you who were confused, of course, that was just he changed his name. Recognizes him as Robert Cheven, and Arthur asks, "Who is this guy, Grandpa?" And Archibald replies with, "Robert was one of my engineering students, although that was so many years ago now. He was the one I took to Africa, where I met your grandmother, the Bogo Metasalai, and most importantly, the Minimoys." When we discovered the Minimoys, together, he began to present crazy ideas to me, that we should hold a global ceremony here and showcase them to explorers all around the world, and when I refused, he began making wild accusations, such as the idea that I stole the discovery of the Minimoys from him. And Cheven responds with, "It was my discovery. The magic of the Minimoys is the most wondrous discovery of all time, and you just wanted it for yourself." So, I'm going to go in depth and explain in my own words, not in writing, who is Robert Cheven. As stated, Robert Cheven was one of Archibald's students when he was an engineer. Archibald had great trust in Robert. He met Robert when Robert was very young, when he was in his early 20s, and took him under his... excuse me. Took him under his wing and trained him in the ways of engineering. Which is why he's as intelligent as Archibald. And he trusted him so much that he took him to Africa as a friend, really, because he had so much trust in him. Excuse me. God. And so he took him with him to Africa, and obviously that's where Archibald met Arthur's grandmother, and met the Bogo Metasalai, and of course discovered the Minimoys. Now, of course, at that time, and I do believe this is something I made a mistake on, well, not made a mistake on, I didn't actually state anything to do with this, I didn't actually state anything about this, but basically, I forgot that at that time, Daisy, Arthur's grandmother, never actually knew about the Minimoys. She wasn't there. Well, she was obviously there, but Archibald never showed her the Minimoys because she didn't know about them until he came back with the treasure and with Arthur. So basically, Archibald didn't trust Daisy, or perhaps just didn't want to get her involved, but because Robert was a man, an engineer, an explorer like he was, he decided to trust Cheven with the secret of the Minimoys. Now, one difference between Robert and Archibald was that Robert was ambitious, and obviously he was young, he was an engineer, he was being trained under the best there was, and he wanted to make a name for himself. So, like I said, he proposed the idea to Archibald that they showcase the Minimoys to the entire world, and together they would become the most famous explorers in the history of the world, having discovered a race of sentient, minuscule beings. Of course, by this point, Archibald had formed a friendship with the Minimoys and had started teaching them stuff, how to harness light and energy, giving them technology and so on and so forth, and he knew that if they did that, then that would just end up, people would find out about the Minimoys, try to harness their magic and use it for their own purposes, and Archibald knew that that was not a good idea. So he told Robert that that was not what they were going to do, and that they were going to leave them in peace in Africa. But by this point, it wasn't just ambition, it was greed that was trying to snake its way around Robert's heart. So he started to believe that because, I mean, he never really comprehended that Archibald would have this bond with the Minimoys. He just saw it that he was trying to take them away from him, and that he was trying to claim the discovery for himself. So when he threw accusations around, but of course it didn't work, and Archibald wouldn't allow him to showcase the Minimoys. So Robert went back to America and talked to the higher up explorers and told them all about this discovery. And of course, naturally, they thought he was insane. I mean, a race of elves living in Africa underground with magic? Like, come on, Chauvelin, get a hold of yourself. So obviously this was really driving Chauvelin to the boiling point. So he went back to Africa, but of course Archibald knew that he had gone to tell someone, and although they wouldn't believe him, he would be back very soon. So that is when he gathered up the Minimoys and transported them back to America to live with him. And when Robert went back, Archibald and the Minimoys were gone. And he lost them. And for so many years, like, the war, obviously, the first Arthur and the Invisibles takes place in the 1960s. And sometimes I do forget that in my writing. So if there are a few weird time paradoxes, like I do recall in Arthur 5 I did say that Arthur and Dylan sometimes texted, and obviously mobile phones weren't really a thing back then. So just give me a bit of slack if you see something like that, because obviously it's a bit weird to think about setting it in the past when it's sort of close-ish to where we are now. Anyway, back to the point. There was the war and everything, and Archibald went to war, so Chauvelin couldn't find him. And Chauvelin, although it was meant to be like every man fighting in the war, Chauvelin managed to sort of lay low, and he spent the next, like, I don't know the time gap between the discovery of the Minimoys and Arthur discovering them himself. It was probably about maybe 20 years. So for the next 20 years, Chauvelin spent all of his time searching for the Minimoys. Sort of like Davido spent all those years searching for the treasure and trying to get a hold of the Susho household so that he could look for it. So he spent all that time searching for them, and he basically found nothing. He couldn't find Archibald, he couldn't find the Minimoys, he couldn't find where he'd sent them. And that, of course, was until the events of Arthur 1, when Archibald went missing for 4 years. I'm pretty sure that was the time gap. And hold on, I'm recording with my phone, and it needs charging. I'm back. Got the lead. Let me just plug it in. Okay, phone is plugged back in. So, as I was saying, Chauvelin couldn't find Archibald, he couldn't find when the Minimoys had been sent. But of course, he did find out that Archibald came back from the war safe, but he couldn't find where he'd gone. Because he didn't live... In the book, it's explained that Archibald didn't actually live in that house all the time. When he came back from the war, it was given to him by Davido's parents for his services to the country. And obviously then he invited Daisy to come and live with him, and then Arthur went there as well. But then Chauvelin eventually found out that Archibald had gone missing and had magically reappeared. What's more, he found out that he had re-emerged and magically been able to pay off the debts that Davido had been pressing against them. But still, he didn't have a location. And then the war happened. Not World War II, the War of Two Worlds. And obviously, I've not really gone into detail. That is one thing that might actually be worth exploring in the future. The whole thing about what the outside world thought of the War of Two Worlds. Because obviously, giant mosquitoes, Malthazar, who everyone assumed to be the devil, that's a big thing to report about. I mean, there wasn't really a government cover-up. Well, the FBI didn't roll up and be like, right, we got to cover this stuff up. No, there was no cover-up at all. So that might be a thing to explore in the future. What happened with the War of Two Worlds and what people thought of it and stuff like that. But obviously the War of Two Worlds was a big deal, and finally, when Cheven found out about this, he knew that it had to be around that region, because he knew about the Sage, he knew about Malthazar, because obviously Malthazar was there when they discovered the Minimoys, he always has been. And he knew who Malthazar was. We see that when he first finds Malthazar in the glass cup. He knew who Malthazar was, he knew who the Sage were, so he knew that they must have been nearby. So he did a little search around Daisy Town. Not being there, obviously, because he knew that he had to remain undercover until the time was right. And eventually, he found Archibald's house. And this is something that I'd planned to reveal in Arthur 4, but I never really did. Cheven's revealed to have these smoke bombs, these little jars of yellow smoke that when thrown, knock out everyone who's intoxicated by it, and then shrinks them. Now, I've never actually revealed how or why he has those. Now, those, although they're similar to Archibald's potions in a way, they weren't actually invented by Archibald. They were invented by him. And what Cheven did, obviously, we see at the end of Arthur 3 that there are some Sage being like sent off to jail and such, and that also would be something interesting to explore, but obviously some of them will have died. And what happened was that Cheven got a few of the Sage, the dead Sage, and studied them, and found out that obviously this was in the period of the 10 moons between Arthur 3 and Arthur 4. Cheven took these corpses and studied them and realized that there was a very fine layer of something on, like, over their skin, over their armor, and he found out that it was the residue of the potion Malthazar used to grow them to human size. So by the very painstaking process of removing the residue, he was able to reverse the effects. Like, I imagine, even I don't really know how he did it exactly, but what I imagine to have happened, that the residue was just very, very, like, fine golden dust, and obviously you would have to get a lot of dead sage to have anything, and he put it in a little mortar, made sure it was ground up, and then heated it up into gas, and then tested it on stuff, and found out that it worked and that he created shrink bombs. And he knew that he would have to come armed to Archibald's house, because Archibald stopped him before, and he knew that if he wasn't prepared, Archibald would stop him again. So, after 10 moons of practicing with the smoke bombs and testing and all that stuff, he was finally ready. And of course, he knew, just like Archibald did, when the 10th moon was, like, each year. And he waited until the 10th moon. And finally, he made his move and arrived at the Shusho household. And it's here that he learned everything about Arthur. Because we see him arrive at the Shusho household. Arthur goes down the telescope and starts to have a good night, and he tells his family before they go to distract Shiven and make sure that he doesn't find them. We don't actually see what happens in between then and seeing Archibald, Daisy and the Metasalai, as well as Darkosh, in the forest. What happened was Armand and Rose went to distract Shiven, and Shiven just saw right through it and used one of his smoke bombs to shrink and capture Armand and Rose and imprison them. And later on we know that he did the same to Archibald, Daisy and the rest of the Metasalai. And of course, after he'd captured Rose and Armand, he let Archibald go for a little bit because he knew that he wouldn't come back for a while, and attacked the Seven Kingdoms, specifically the Minimoy village, with the infamous shovel scene. He literally picked up a shovel and drove it straight through the ceiling of the village and scooped out the center with all the Minimoys on it. And of course, after that, he looked for Archibald and everyone. Darkosh used the vines, and then he captured everyone else. Then, of course, everything happened with Arthur, him maneuvering his way through Paradise Alley and going back up into the house, and Shiven found Malthazar in the cup and used one of Archibald's potions to grow him to human size again, and managed to capture Arthur as well, but Darkosh came to the rescue and managed to rescue Arthur as well. And eventually, it was time for the final confrontation, and Shiven after Arthur, Darkosh, Selenia, and Bedamish escaped from them, Shiven went back inside to find his phone to call up all of the major explorers to come and see the Minimoys the very next day. But while looking for his phone in the study, he found a scroll, a Metasalai scroll, that foretold of a power called the Power of Balance, which was an ancient Metasalai ritual that could be used to grant someone amazing power. And the way it worked, you would take a potion of enlargement and a potion of shrinking and combine them together so that you would technically be growing and shrinking at the same time. And because of that, the soul would be confused, and you would possess the soul of a human and the soul of a Minimoy at the same time. So obviously, having two souls, that's a bit of a big step. So that was what granted him the power. Now, of course, what he didn't realise is that once he'd done it, it was irreversible. And the only way to stop him was to unbalance him. And that's, of course, after a lot of battling, that's what Arthur did. Now, the Power of Balance basically turned Shiven into a monster. His blood was replaced with like golden liquid, and his flesh was burned black, and he could fire laser beams of gold out of his hands and draw fire from nothing and levitate people. He was pretty much, this is something I've considered a few times. Who would be more powerful? Demon Sylvain or Mulder? And considering we've only just been introduced to Mulder, you guys have no idea of the full extent of Mulder's power just yet, but you will see that as the book goes on. But I would like to see those two fight. I think that'd be quite a cool death match. Yeah, sorry about that. My phone decided to stop recording because it was out of storage, so I had to move a few videos. Anyway, as I was saying, so Archibald explains that the only way to really destroy Sylvain after he did what he did with the power of balance is to ironically unbalance him, which is to use either one of the potions on him, and he just happened to have a potion of growth on him, because plot. So in one of the most epic parts of the Arthur franchise, but probably one of the most epic parts of Arthur 4, Arthur jumps on a spring from Beda's knife, catapults into the air, and slices open the growth potion mid-air, and has it shower over Sylvain. Sylvain's power, which he ironically craved in the first place, begins to destroy him, and he tries to kill Malthazar with his last ounce of power, but he doesn't have the strength, and all he ends up doing is starting to shrink him back to normal size. There's a horrific explosion, and Sylvain is destroyed. Robert Sylvain came a long way from being Archibald's assistant, and he eventually realised that it wasn't really fame he was after, it was power. And that power, ironically, eventually destroyed him. I'm quite proud of Sylvain's character. I think he was a very interesting addition to the Arthur franchise. Now, there's one thing I'd like to say. While that explosion is actually visible in one chapter of Arthur 5, Scars of the Past, where Arthur and Archibald find the impact still there, looking like the day it was made, and they basically say that the power of balance is an unnatural power, and that it's left a scar upon the earth. And although that explosion was pretty damn fierce, and Sylvain's body was destroyed, he certainly changed from when he used the power of balance. So maybe he couldn't even be defined as a human anymore. Who knows? Was Sylvain really destroyed? But that's a topic for another time. And so we reach the end of this video, and it's going to be a long one to edit as well. I'm sure you guys don't mind. Like, my Q&A videos and stuff like this are usually about an hour long. And considering that all my other videos, like edits and rescores and stuff like that, are usually around 2 to 3 minutes long, I think it makes up for that. And I'm sure you guys don't mind. Now, I would like to say a few things. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Animation Fan Squad. She is one of my longest running fans to date. She has stuck by this channel for a very long time, and she's always one of the first commenters on every new video. I cannot ever thank her enough for this, and she basically wanted me to tell you guys that she has her channel. Her account is actually a channel now. She does drawing videos, and she's actually started doing a bit of gaming. So she basically, she wants a bit of help getting started. So I say, you guys, go check her out. Her comment will probably be in the description. I'll make sure to pin it so you guys can go and have a look at it. Go check out her channel, subscribe to her, because it's the least you guys can do for one of the most loyal fans of the franchise, just like me. And I would just like to say thank you to all of you, because Arthur 4 was a very strange process for me, but it allowed me to realise that I can really be whoever I want to be, and that whatever I want to like, I can like, and if I believe in it, then I can do great things. And if someone had told me all the things I'd be doing because of having started Arthur 4, I wouldn't have believed them. And I'd like to share one of them with you, because at the time I couldn't, because I couldn't show my face. But as the legend goes, I'm off camera now. If one day our lands are threatened by an invader, then and only then, a pure heart, motivated by the spirit of justice, this is really awkward, may remove the sword of 1,000 powers and lead a just battle. It's certainly looking a little worse for wears, but this is my sword of power. I use this for a cosplay that I did a few months back when I went to a convention, and I'll put some images up right now of me as Arthur, and I think you'll agree I look pretty damn awesome. This sword, if you're wondering, this is not actually like merchandise or anything. I know merchandise does exist of the Sword of Power, but this was actually something that was made, and you can see it's a fantastic, this is not meant to, it's meant to be there, but you know, glue comes off. You can see that this is a pretty damn awesome replica. And my mum actually made this. She's fantastic at making stuff. She's very creative, and I think you'll agree that she did an amazing job. Honestly. And like on the day when I was in the cosplay holding this and just walking around, absolutely fantastic feeling. I even encountered a bunch of people that liked Arthur, and that was fantastic, because there's probably not been an Arthur cosplay in years, and to be someone who did that and to have that honor it was amazing. So I thought I'd just show you guys this because it's pretty neat to have this. So that will be the end of this video. You guys will see it about, I'm just having a look, just over a week after I've recorded this. And I really hope you do enjoy this video, and I hope you enjoyed a little insight into the story that started it all. Arthur 4, Defender of the Seven Kingdoms. And I'd just like to say thanks to everyone who's commented on Arthur 4 over the years. Well, I say over the years, it's only been a year. Over the year, everyone who's commented on Arthur 4 and Arthur 5 as well, thank you. And before I forget, I had to make sure to do this. All of you deserve credit for commenting on Arthur 4. But I'd like to thank two people in particular. Because, like I said, I really didn't get a lot of comments on Arthur 4 for a very, very long time. And, you know, that is quite disheartening. But eventually, I'm just trying to find them. Give me a sec. Eventually, someone did comment. On July 13th, 2018, a Wattpad user by the name of Lewis Papa Ghost left a comment saying this story is interesting and amazing. And I thank them for their comment. And it was really nice to get someone's feedback on my story, and it was just really heartwarming because obviously I've told you guys before that I had a gaming channel before called Players Adventures that I did for a very long time, and I got nowhere. And putting so much effort into something and to have nothing in return is really, really disheartening. But to do this, because obviously gaming is something that's a lot easier to get into, and this is different because it's obviously something that not many people are interested in, so I thought originally it might even go worse, but it's been a bigger success than I could ever have hoped for. So I'd like to thank 3 people, actually, which is Lewis Papa Ghost, which is my first commenter, Connor Frowned, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right, I hope I am, who was another commenter who joined at around about chapter 15, nearing the end. And I would also like to thank my second commenter, which was Jetra Shocker. These 3 were my first commenters: Lewis Papa Ghost, Jetra Shocker, and Connor Freyund. And without them, I wouldn't say I would have stopped, but they obviously, it always fills me with joy to see that little red circle above my Wattpad name, to see I've got notifications. But obviously I'd never seen that before, and to get comments on my stuff was absolutely amazing. I'm probably gonna message them to say thank you after this video. But from me to them, thank you, you 3, because your support means more than you could ever know, and to get support on something like this meant the absolute world. And to all of you who have joined, wherever you've joined from, the finale of Arthur 4, the first chapter of Arthur 5, the latest chapter of Arthur 5, I thank all of you, because these books wouldn't be what they are without all of your support, your wonderful comments, and it means the world to me to have you supporting me. So on this day, Arthur 4 was finished 1 year ago. For you guys. It's not for me yet, but I guarantee you, on the day you see this, while I'm on holiday, I will be thinking of Arthur 4 and the progress I've made and all of you. And it's incredible because at the time of when I finished Arthur 4, on September 5th, I keep clicking on bloody Arthur 5. On the day I finished Arthur 4, Arthur 4 had, in total, 630 reads, 29 votes, and 13 comments. Now, it has 44 comments, 168 votes, and 5,200 reads. 5,200 reads. The fact that it's gone up nearly 5,000 reads in the space of a year is incredible. And I cannot thank all of you enough. I mean, even if you don't leave a comment, even if you don't vote, the fact that you click on it and you read it means the world to me. The fact that you give it a chance. So, on this day, September 5th, for you guys, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your support, for your dedication, and for your help. Because I couldn't have done this without all of you. And every time I publish it, you keep me going. Every time I publish a new chapter, I see all of your comments saying how much you love certain bits and how you can't wait for the story to continue. That keeps me going. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed this little insight into how this journey started for me. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you on another video very, very soon. Goodbye, everyone.